Welcome to the Mass Effect HYPEcast. I'm your host, Morgan, aka Bon Diesel, and this is a podcast about Mass Effect, the future of BioWare's premier franchise, and all of our speculation and ideas for the next game. Before we get started, subscribe to the Mass Effect HYPEcast on your favorite podcast app and leave a review on Spotify or iTunes. Subscribe to the Bon Diesel YouTube channel to get all of my videos, including this podcast. Thank you to everyone who supports as YouTube members and Twitch subscribers. If you're interested in supporting this podcast and all of my other content, please check out the link in the show description. Today we're going to be talking about BioWare focusing on Mass Effect for the future, the blog that came out recently. We're going to be talking about the 30th anniversary of BioWare as a studio. We're going to be talking a bit about the EA Q3 2025 fiscal year investor report and how there was a little bit of information in there worth talking about, as well as some stuff with Mike Gamble, the Battlefield Labs announcement, and how I think that impacts the game, and just how I'm feeling in general. Before we jump into all that, it's been interesting. There isn't a ton of news to talk about specifically with Mass Effect, but there is a lot of stuff going on around it. So I wanted to do a bit this episode talking about kind of the future of BioWare, the future of Mass Effect, what could happen, what might happen, worst case, best case scenarios, get into all of that in this discussion. And if you're new here, I welcome you. If you've been here before, I'm excited to have a good chat and hopefully hear from you afterwards. So I'll start off with the blog that came out a couple weeks ago. The whole thing with this blog, I think, was supposed to be reassurance. But the thing I've learned over some time is that if a blog is from Gary McKay, it's probably a mixed bag, if not bad news. If it's from Mike Gamble or just the team, it's probably good news. This one was from Gary. I'd been predicting some kind of blog from them in January for a while, and we got it. I was just hoping it would be like a, hey, we're in full production and everything's super cool. So all, full steam ahead. But unfortunately, it was a blog from Gary McKay, who's the head of BioWare, the whole studio. And it was a mixed bag. It was, hey, we're all in on Mass Effect. That's what we're focused on now. Dragon Age the Veilguard is out. It's done. We're moving on. So we're in pre-production on Mass Effect still. We're all in on that. But, and then this is where I think the whole thing kind of fell apart. So a bunch of corpo lingo and corpo speak of being efficient, and our team, we can't fully utilize everyone we currently have. And what it came down to was them acknowledging that people had been placed over the last few months, and we knew this, with other studios. That there were people over at EA Motive, Ripple Effect, both of those who are helping with Battlefield, and Motive has an Iron Man game, and people were all over the place. We even saw that John Epler is at the Skate Studio now, and the impression was, or at least some people had expressed this fairly publicly, of, hey, we're being placed in these studios because Mass Effect isn't ready for full production yet. They're still doing pre-production. So once it's ready, they're going to bring us back and we're going to make the game. But with this blog, what was made clear was that those people weren't temporarily at those studios. They are now there full-time. That is their job now. And this, from people I've talked to directly, was news to a lot of people that this is addressing. And it was kind of weird. I even know of at least one or a few devs who, when the blog came out, thought they were on the Mass Effect team at BioWare, and found out, I believe that day, they were being moved to another studio to work on other games, and that was a permanent move. So that sucks, right? And to be fair, at least it was acknowledged in the blog. What wasn't acknowledged in the blog was that there was I'm not under the impression it was 50 or 100 people. I'm under the impression it was a dozen or two people were just let go. Now, I don't know the full circumstances around them being let go. I don't know if they were given an option to go to one of these other studios and they said no. I don't know if they were just straight up dropped, or I don't know. I don't know the full situation, and I haven't really seen any of the people directly say what happened, and that's up to them. That's their lives, their privacy, all that. There's probably people who got let go we don't even know of yet because they never mentioned it, right? So that wasn't mentioned in the blog, and I thought that really, really sucked. I thought that was a huge miss. And it's not even, they could have even sugarcoated it, right? Like in the blog, they could have just been like, we're focused on Mass Effect. The people that we have temporarily put in other studios are just there now. We don't need that size of a team quite yet while we're in pre-production. And unfortunately, we weren't able to place everybody, and we do regret that, some of our employees had to be let go. But that's not what they said, and I thought that really sucked. So then we kind of move on. Like I'm reaching out to some people, getting some info, find out that, some of the people I know still are on Mass Effect at BioWare. The majority of the people I've interacted with or who I at least follow on social media and stuff, the vast majority are no longer at BioWare, which was a strange realization. And even reaching out to some of those people, the interesting thing is they didn't even seem like mad. Like most of the people I spoke to, like they were definitely frustrated, but they were more like sad because a majority of the people I've interacted with really want to work on Mass Effect. That was like part of the reason they joined BioWare. A few of them joined and were hired for Mass Effect and kind of got roped into doing Dragon Age, even though that wasn't what they even came to the studio for. And so it was kind of interesting for me to realize that, like, I'm sure that maybe after the sadness wore off, then they were mad. But at least in that initial reaction, it wasn't as much anger and spite as I expected. It was really just people being like, just like bummed, I'm sure a part of it was the people I spoke to were people who still had their jobs. They're just with other studios. They seem fairly, reasonably excited to work on these other projects that they're now on. But no one likes their agency being taken away, so you can't blame those people for being mad. As for the people who got fired or who got let go or who left, it was real weird how it was mostly writers. It sounds like there's definitely people from other parts of the development kind of structure who also got let go. But it was like all the writers, to the point where I saw someone point out that as far as we know, there's only 3 writers left at BioWare that we're aware of. Maybe they've hired more. Maybe there's people we don't know of. Not everyone's super public on social media and all that. But it's namely being married to Marley, who's the narrative director for Mass Effect, and a few other people who are, I believe, more veteran people there as well. Married to Marley being someone who's outside the studio. She's not even one of the one of the veteran devs who's been there forever. She has been there for a few years at this point, but she's always been there for Mass Effect. We now know after Mark Dara's recent video, a few weeks or a month or two ago, that all of the Mass Effect devs did work on Dragon Age in some capacity, but that's kind of where we're at. An interesting tidbit I did get from some of the people I spoke to is that the impression is that even though these moves to the other studios is permanent, that there is still, I guess, some like acknowledgement that like when full production happens on Mass Effect, that there will be an opportunity to apply to go back to BioWare if they so choose. We'll talk more about that and why that may not be necessary for them to leave their new studios to work on Mass Effect. We'll get to that in later down in the part about the Battlefield Labs. But I don't know. I have mixed feelings on this. Like, I'm a newer fan, so I don't have these like deep-seated connections to a lot of these people who either got moved or let go or whatever. So it's also worth acknowledging that most of the people who got let go were Dragon Age people who had historically mostly worked on Dragon Age, with exceptions, people being like, I believe it was Trick and Karen Weeks, who were both are gone. but the way things are worded, I'm still just not positive if they were fired, and maybe they were. Maybe I missed something, or and I could definitely see this happening with them. They were given an opportunity to go to another studio, quote unquote, and they didn't want to do that because they want to be a BioWare. Who knows? They both have a lot of clout in the industry. I suspect that they'll be fine in the long run. I hope that they'll be able to find other opportunities. But this was some big uproar in the community. To me, I have to be totally honest. I like, for Mass Effect especially, the both of them, but Trek especially was directly involved in a lot of the characters I like and the storylines I like. I'll be totally honest, didn't really always love the choices made in the writing, but that's neither here nor there. I think an interesting thing to talk about, and something that came out around this time as well, which we'll talk more about in another topic. This is when we had gotten articles and some reporting that Dragon Age: The Veilguard had only hit about 50% of what EA expected it to from a player perspective. The number put out was around 1.5 million players, and they were expecting about double that. It's hard not to acknowledge that that revenue difference in what they expected and what they got is probably why this studio is getting pared down. The most recent number I saw is that the studio is around 250 to 300 people at full scale on the Veilguard last year, and it may be down under 100 at this point. That many people, the majority of those being moved to other studios, but a non-zero number also being let go. The lack of revenue from the Veilguard probably didn't help here. And, maybe the more controversial thing to talk about is that it is possible that EA saw a lot of the reaction from the community, whether it be Dragon Age or the regular gaming community or whatever, and saw that there was a lot of dissatisfaction with the writing, the story, a lot of those things. And maybe it seems like they kind of cleaned house, if I have to be totally honest. It's it's only on top of back in 2023 when they fired a bunch of the veteran writers back then, and then now most of them, there's as I said, there may only be 3 left at this point, which is pretty wild if you think about it, kind of in the big picture. So I don't know what the plan will be. I have to imagine they'll be hiring some people, even just on the pre-production team. It's always possible that Mary DeMarley wants to bring in her own team as the narrative director. That wouldn't surprise me at all. There's always a possibility that they can bring back some old veterans, that people who went to Humanoid before it was shut down. Even Mac Walter's studio isn't in good shape right now. So maybe they have other people they're going to bring back, or maybe they hire new people. I have no idea. It's hard to believe that they'll just stick with 3 writers though, because they need editors and all kinds of stuff, especially as they, I assume at some point this year, hopefully move into full production. This isn't good news. Obviously this thing, it wasn't, there is always the possibility these devs can come back, or at least the ones who were transferred. There is going to be the issue of people who don't want to come back at this point, or people who are going to leave EA over this. I'm under the impression there are some financial reasons why people would stay with the new studios, even if they don't really want to, which that feels kind of gross from what I was told, but I guess that's how these things work. What was interesting is in that video from a few weeks ago that Mark Dara did, when he talked about the 250 to 300 person number, he mentioned, hey, some people are working at other studios who were at BioWare. And even then, he never talked about them being moved permanently, but he did talk about how the more senior the roles those people were in, the less likely they would be able to just come right back to BioWare. And he talked a lot about how it was, very likely they were going to have issues with, maybe people go to this other studio to help and end up really enjoying that project, and they don't want to leave when BioWare needs them. Or, maybe the team can't afford to let them go. There's all kinds of things that could happen. And it makes me wonder if this decision to make those moves permanent was something that maybe those studios required. Those studios are sitting there like, hey, we appreciate you letting these people help us, but if we're only going to have them for 2 or 3 months or something, and then they're just going to get pulled out from under us, and then we're going to, be in trouble. I could see that maybe there was some kind of politicking happening inside the publisher, where there was enough complaints from the various studios who were getting these temporary workers saying like, hey, like this can't be temporary. We need, we need these people to stay on. And maybe that's why this happened. I don't really know. My honest guess is that BioWare and Mike Gamble and the leadership at that studio who are doing pre-production on this next game may have told EA like, hey, like it's going to be another 3-6 months, maybe a year before we can even go into full production. And I highly doubt, like I said before, these studios are okay with just, waiting for these people to get pulled out from under them. And maybe they made this move because maybe full production on the next Mass Effect is a little bit further away than some of us thought it was. I figured it was as soon as this month or next. So, let's get into the anniversary because there's not much to say. BioWare's 30th anniversary was on the 1st of February, and I think that people were expecting at least something. And there was literally nothing. There was a few people like me who kind of threw out like, hey, cool, 30th anniversary. Things are a bit up and down now. It's maybe not always easy to celebrate, but there is still something worth celebrating, I think. I really thought it was a missed opportunity from BioWare to move the conversation along. Obviously, I assume they didn't do anything just to try to be sensitive to everything that was going on, all the changes, all of that stuff, people who have been let go. But, just from a purely, I guess, corporate point of view, I'm kind of surprised they didn't try to take that opportunity to maybe start to move the conversation along to what's next. But they didn't do that. We did get a video from Mark Dara, who I've mentioned a few times already, where he basically documented he's had basically, up until this year even, had something to do with BioWare since its inception, essentially. And he went through every single year back to like 1995 or 6 or whatever, all the way to recently. I wish I had a bunch of info to talk about all the stuff he revealed. I'm not, the only thing I learned was that in 2000, I think it was like 18 or something, they used the Pinkertons. If you've played Red Dead Redemption 2, you know who I'm talking about. They used the Pinkertons for security because there were some issues that happened back around that time. And it's just wild to think that this basically this like union busting agency from 150 years ago is still around and still calls themselves the same thing they used to. And they still kind of do the same stuff they used to. I thought that was interesting, but otherwise, he was extremely, extremely quick with like 2020 through now. I'm assuming whether it's like professional courtesy or NDAs or some mix of both of those, he basically didn't say anything about the last 4 or 5 years. And so I thought that part kind of fell a little bit flat, and that's okay though. I suspect there's good reason for it. Coming to more recent news, just in this last week, I'm recording this on February 5th of 2025. The EA 2025 Q3 investor report happened where they, legally have to get on and talk to all the investors, reveal a bunch of information, do a bunch of filings. And there was a little bit to glean from this, mostly about Dragon Age of the Veilguard, but I think some of the language and some of the things said we can probably apply to kind of what's going on with BioWare and what may happen with Mass Effect. So one of the first things they talked about was actually a pretty positive statement about Dragon Age of the Veilguard, saying it was received well critically, but just did not, quote unquote, I believe this is the quote, find the audience that it needed to. Which I think fits. I actually thought it was a fairly honest statement about it. I think that's true. I think it was a really good game that for whatever reason didn't land. I think there's a lot of blame or a lot of people who think that all the controversy over Tash or, some of those conversations had a big impact. I really don't think they did. I think that's such a very vocal minority thing that happens that all of us who are like kind of paying attention to this stuff 24/7 every day are maybe more aware of than others. I think the biggest feedback I've seen or the biggest thing or trend I've noticed with the Veilguard is that it seems like a lot of the Dragon Age fans just weren't really satisfied with it. That it was a fun game to play. It was cool. Some of the places they set the game in were cool because people had never seen them before. There was a lot of excitement about that, but there was also a lot of people upset that, the way that some things were implemented, the fact that previous choices in other games were extremely minimal in the ones that actually affected the way that old characters were handled in this game and the way that they were portrayed and stuff like that. It seemed like it just didn't really scratch the itch of a lot of the Dragon Age players and that built-in fan base. And I suspect that probably made a pretty big difference. The people in my community who at one point seemed the most excited for Veilguard also seemed to be the ones who were the most unsatisfied with it when it actually came out. Where someone like me, who's like not invested at all in the franchise, I just thought it was a fun game. I had a great time with it. I definitely had some complaints, but nothing major. It was my game of the year last year. So, with some extremely stiff competition, there was like 3 games I probably could have said were my game of the year, but it's the one I chose because it had the most, complete in the most satisfying amount of, gameplay and story and all of that. So, it was interesting because during this call, it was obvious that the EAFC, the soccer game or American, or non-American football game, was really the driver behind a lot of these revenue issues they had in that quarter, where the Veilguard was kind of thrown in there as well, unfairly in my opinion, and it kind of reinforced this here. They spoke about Dragon Age: The Veilguard for all of 30 seconds during this hour-long call, where they spent a lot of time, dozens of minutes, on talking about the soccer game. So and all the things that they're doing to try to revamp that and how it's getting better and all this, it's it seems pretty obvious that despite like insider gaming blaming the revenue prediction drop on Veilguard, that just wasn't what actually happened, even if that's the way it's been portrayed a little bit. There were some other kind of statements that were interesting. There was definitely some sentiment in some of the conversation that Dragon Age: The Veilguard losing its live service origins, kind of that initial outlook on the game, was a mistake, and they made pretty clear that one-time purchases on these single-player games just isn't going to be enough to justify them for most of the IP that they're making single-player games for. I thought that was pretty interesting. A lot of outlets really portrayed that as basically making assumptions now that the next Mass Effect is going to be that it's going to be a live service game now. That's not how I interpreted what they said, especially because they talked about the one-time initial purchase thing. I mean, that seems like it's true. It seems like if there was DLC or something for Veilguard, it probably would have been better off. And the last thing I've seen is, I believe anonymously, some former Veilguard devs have talked about that they wanted to make DLC, but EA specifically didn't want them to. And that kind of tracks with what I've been saying for quite a while, in that it kind of seems like EA just they were very patient with them. It sounds like they initially wanted this game to come out like a year or two earlier, and they gave them time to finish it. But it seems like they really wanted them to just get it out and move on. And that's, seemingly what has happened. Whether that was the right choice or not, I have no idea. What I'm guessing is that after Anthem, they will not be asking BioWare to make another live service game. I would find that highly unlikely. What I think is way, way more likely is that we will see Mass Effect have some kind of alternate revenue streams that will enable the game to continue making money after that initial 75% of copies are purchased that will ever be purchased throughout the lifetime of the game. So we could be looking at things like, Mass Effect 3 had that multiplayer mode, the co-op kind of wave horde mode thing, where you could buy what was it, like loot boxes or whatever, and get new characters or weapons or cosmetics or whatever. I think that's actually fairly likely. Some kind of multiplayer component, and I'm not talking about like co-op in the game. I'm talking about something that would be separate, much like how Mass Effect 3 had it. I think it's possible that we could see, almost certainly, we're going to see opportunities for people to buy special editions of this next game to get 5 days early access, or kind of what like Xbox is doing with Avowed right now and has done with some of their other games. I think we could see kind of kind of not a full live service thing, but something where they release more skins and weapons and things over time. Obviously, you assume like, well, they could make more story content through like DLC or expansions, and they could, but that's going, I think, to require the next Mass Effect to be a big hit from launch. And then they say like, hey, yep, 2 million people bought this in the first 3 months, or 3 million, or whatever their number is going to be. Let's approve some DLC. Let's get some more story out there, or let's approve a sequel, or whatever they end up doing. So I don't think they're going to make the next Mass Effect a live service game. Personally, I don't think they're going to risk that, but I definitely do. I think it's almost a guarantee that we're going to see them, create other revenue streams that we didn't get with Veilguard. Veilguard, you just buy the game. I think there's a special edition. There's a few levels of that, and that's it. So, now that after the first 3 months, they've probably sold the majority of the copies of that game they'll ever sell. There'll be some tail. They'll continue selling. And I wouldn't be surprised if Veilguard maybe ends up paying for itself in the long run, but it's not going to be some big money maker for EA. And, say what you will about EA, there's plenty of bad things to say, but they are a for-profit business. And if they repeatedly make products that lose money, especially with one studio, it's not going to be great news for that studio. So they're going to either change something or get rid of it. And I would rather them try to change something before they get rid of BioWare. Jumping into a few other news things. Mike Gamble is obviously the head of the Mass Effect game, is obviously kind of itching to talk. He's been posting all kinds of stuff on social media, as recently as he posted about being excited about playing Kingdom Come Deliverance 2. And then someone said like, oh, hey, even after what he said about Veilguard, there was some controversy a while ago where the head of that studio posted about how the first game, which is many years old at this point, had more players on Steam than Veilguard. It was like this guy's, he's a kind of a jackass, to be totally honest. Not Mike Gamble, but the head, the studio head of the team making Kingdom Come Deliverance 2. Or whatever it's called, I can't remember. Mike Gamble responded to that being like, hey, when I release Mass Effect, I hope that all, other heads of games and studios want to play it too. And if they don't, oh well. I'm paraphrasing, but that was the idea. So just seeing him say when we release this Mass Effect game, I mean, it's not like Mike Gamble's going to go on Twitter and be like, guys, I don't know if it's going to make it. Like, he's obviously going to be the eternal optimist. But it is, he didn't have to say that. So we shouldn't take too much from such a simple statement. But I think you can take something. And that I feel like if he was genuinely concerned that things are like in real bad shape there, he probably wouldn't be saying things like that. But who knows? Maybe he's even more of the blind optimist than I am. Kind of a side story, but I do think it's related, is Battlefield Labs got announced. And this is going to be a testing program for Battlefield 6, or whatever they end up calling it, that they're pushing this huge initiative to get players in there and get feedback and all that on the game before it comes out, after the pretty disastrous 2042 launch. I love that game personally, but I also recognize that it was probably, at least at first, a pretty tough situation for EA. And what I found interesting about this is it may be a glimpse into the future of BioWare. Because what it is it's this testing program, but it also pointed out that there's 4 studios working on this Battlefield game. There's DICE, obviously, that's the Battlefield studio. There's EA Motive, who I didn't know that they were working on it, but apparently they are. They also did co-dev on the Veilguard. There's Criterion, who's the old Need for Speed studio, who's been, I guess, working on Battlefield for a long time. They've put out their own games in somewhat recent history, but they seems like they're mostly a support studio now. And then there's Ripple Effect, which is from what I could see, they've only done co-development on Battlefield. So the reason I think that's interesting is I would say that that's almost guaranteed to be how they make the next Mass Effect. So we see BioWare getting pared down to 100 or fewer devs. We see all their devs going to these other studios. A lot of these studios that I'm talking about, between EA Motive and Ripple Effect. And it wouldn't surprise me at all if later this year, or maybe next, we find out that, oh, Mass Effect is in full production. They're out of pre-production and they're staffing up a little bit, but they're not climbing back up to 200, 250 devs. They may climb up to 150, devs or so. And then we'll find out that, this is a BioWare led game with the assistance of EA Motive, of maybe Criterion. Maybe my dream scenario personally would be Respawn, especially if my theory that they're going to do some kind of other revenue streams, especially if it's multiplayer, that we could see Respawn potentially come in and make a multiplayer mode or something for them. That's more of a pipe dream for me. I don't know if that would actually happen. They do have recent experience with Unreal Engine, with the Jedi game. So if that's what the next Mass Effect is on, they could have some assistance from them as well. We could also see, like I said, I think Motive is almost a guarantee to be coming back and helping out. And so, kind of, it's almost the Ubisoft method to a point, just not as extreme. But it wouldn't surprise me at all if they, keep BioWare smaller, and then they have like a co-dev situation with 2, 3, 4 studios that all work on that game and get it out. And that's why I said before, the people who went to those studios and are now there permanently, it sounds like they may have an opportunity to come back to BioWare, but it sounds like they may end up having the opportunity to work on Mass Effect at those studios. And I would say that's pretty much a guarantee. It seems like that's the way things are going. I don't know if I like it or not. I don't know if it's going to work or not. It's hard to tell. But I think as long as people are employed and the games I want to be made are being made, I guess I find it kind of hard to complain. And then my final thing here of just like, how am I feeling about everything? I mean, it's hard to be hyper optimistic. I will eternally, basically, unless BioWare gets shut down, I'm always going to have hope that things are continuing to happen and will turn out well. I think for me, the big moment I'm looking for is to see them just announce full production. I think this middle time where the studio is small, they're probably the only ones doing the pre-production. They're a fairly small team now, and there's not a huge money commitment into the pre-production of Mass Effect. I think once they announce full production and they start investing into that, then they kind of have to make something at that point. But before then, I admittedly am kind of a little leery and a little concerned. I don't think it's worth freaking out about. At the end of the day, if it all goes bad, I'll be sad and then we'll move on. It's one of those things. But I don't really think that's what's going to happen. But it's hard to tell. I still do believe we're going to get multiple updates on what's going on at BioWare, hopefully specifically with Mass Effect throughout this year. I really do believe that N7 Day this year will be a blowout of sorts. They'll have Dragon Age out of the way. They'll have another year-ish of pre-production at least, and maybe even some full production under their belts. And then after last year with them having nothing basically for N7 Day, I imagine there'll be some desire to make up for that. I hope that's the plan. That's the goal. Like I said, we have, I would assume a pre-production or a full production announcement coming sometime this year. It may be later in the year than I initially guessed. I thought it would be fairly soon, but it doesn't appear that it will be. And then we'll just kind of have to go from there. So it's a weird time in the fandom, but I think it's still, for me, games are for fun. Making content like this is for fun. If I want to be sad and dour about things or doomer about things, there's plenty of other stuff going on in the world that can take that for me. That's not what I do with gaming. So I'm realistic. I appreciate, the time that we're in and the things that are happening. But for me, I'm going to remain excited and optimistic, and until I have a reason not to be. That's a little more, even more tragic than what we've seen already. So hopefully you feel the same. Let me know in the comments and so on and so forth. So if you have your own topics, questions, or feedback, be sure to let me know in my Discord, in the YouTube comments, or hit me up on social media at BondDiesel or at the Mass Effect HYPEcast or Mass Effect Hype. I'm on all the socials now. I just made a new account So go follow those there. If you don't want to see all my ramblings throughout the days and the weeks or whatever, you can just follow that account. You'll see when I post new episodes. I'm also probably going to retweet my my Mass Effect videos on there that I make on YouTube. So be on the lookout for that. I'm on Instagram, Blue Sky, Threads, Twitter. I'm everywhere. So look for Mass Effect HYPEcast or Mass Effect Hype if you want to keep up with all of that stuff. Thank you so much for listening to this episode, and please consider supporting the show and all the other content I'd make by checking out the links in the description of the video or of the podcast. That is all I have for this episode of the Mass Effect HYPEcast. So until next time.